Tennessee football makes a statement in its win against the North Carolina State Wolfpack. This was not Chattanooga. This was a team ranked in the top 25 from the ACC, and the Vols crushed them on Saturday in Charlotte. What does that mean for our outlook on Tennessee's season from here? We will discuss today. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinel's Adam Sparks and John Adams. Guys, this was supposed to be one of the big games of the week, not just in the SEC, but throughout college football. And it felt like a big game for maybe about a quarter. And then soon after that, Tennessee started to pull away. And by the end, it was a laugher. Maybe not surprising that Tennessee scored a bunch of points, but the fact that they limited NC State to just 10 points, the defense looked the part of playoff team. If we had questions about Tennessee, most of it revolved around that secondary as part of the defense. Tennessee answered the bell on Saturday. What did you guys think? How does this affect the way we look at Tennessee moving forward? John, I know you were already thinking playoff coming into the season, but Adam, is this resulting in any rework from your perspective?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let me first tell you the way that I see this game. The way that I try to see this game is from maybe the opponent's perspective or the media that covers the opponent. I listened to a number of podcasts on the drive back from Charlotte to Knoxville after the next day after that game, and the general take from those that cover NC State was that one of those teams on the field was a playoff team, and the other one was a team that had a chance to prove it and was blown out of the stadium. The post-game press conference with Dave Doran, the first question was from one of the beat writers and was phrased, and I wish I had this in front of me, but it was phrased basically, every year you tell us this team's going to be pretty good, and then you go out and get whipped by a superior team like this. And it was even some of the NC State media kind of raised their eyebrows, and we even talked about how the question was phrased. Doran must be used to it because it didn't faze him much. So that's sort of the tone of the two teams. NC State media and I think national media looked at that and said, okay, that was just on the outer rim of playoff teams, but now it's a playoff team, Tennessee, that is. And I was asked after the game by a few people, like, do you regret your preseason pick? I picked 9-3. I mean, regret.
I would say you really care.
I mean, regret is the wrong word. It wasn't like a life decision that I picked 9 wins instead of 10. But was I wrong on that? From my perspective, 2 weeks in, I think so. I remember I said the over under for Tennessee nationally was 8.5 wins. I said 2 weeks ago that I thought the over under should have been 9.5. They're going to go 9-3, or they're going to go 10-2. I would say now the over under should be 10.5. I think this is a 10-2, or possibly I would maybe even lean more heavily to 11-1 at this point, because I would pick them to beat Oklahoma right now. I did in the preseason. In the preseason, I picked them to beat Alabama. I think at Neyland, they still have a pretty good shot at that. And I think this team is more letdown proof than I previously thought. The last 2 seasons, they lost. 2 years ago, they lost to South Carolina in a game they should have won. Maybe that was like Jeremy Banks turmoil. Maybe that was Connor Stallion's scouting system got some thanks to South Carolina. That's another theory out there. Whatever happened in South Carolina game, and then whatever happened in the Missouri game the next year when Tennessee had a letdown, I don't see that happening as much with this Tennessee team. The depth there is on the defensive line. I think they're letdown proof. There's 3 tight ends instead of 2. I think that's more letdown proof. The freshman quarterback, who we knew would be good, I think is really good earlier than I thought, which makes that position a little more letdown proof. And they've just got more depth and more experience. And you look at the schedule, and it's tough to find a place where they're going to have a letdown loss. So for that reason, I don't think this is a 9-3 team. I think this is a 10-2, maybe 11-1 team.
John, you had them at 10-2, I believe, going into the season. You were the orange-colored glasses coming into it. Adam and I were on the 9-3 side of the fence. Like Adam, I might be doing some revising of my preseason projection. In my latest playoff field, I have Tennessee in, which would mean 10-2. But you were already there in the preseason, 10-2. So kudos for you, as Philip Fulmer would say. Are you changing your outlook? Are you inching up toward 11-1, 12-0? Where are you at?
Well, I thought Tennessee would handle NC State, which it did. However, the nature of the victory, the defensive play, the defense making a game-turning play, the defensive line overwhelming NC State. There was just a relentless quality to Tennessee's play in that game, I thought. Yeah, and that I'm kind of like Adam. He shifted where he could see it at 11-1. I had one of Tennessee's losses in preseason to Oklahoma. I don't think Tennessee loses to Oklahoma now. So I guess you could say I have readjusted in that vein. I mean, to me, the two toughest games now are, of course, Georgia and Alabama. But just the overall just domination in that game. Like I said, I thought it would be better than NC State. I didn't think the game would be that close. Still, it was just, the NC State was just totally waylaid, as that reporter brought up to Dave Doran. That was kind of crude. Coaches are so used to getting softball questions, I think, in their own press conferences, or at least maybe not softball, but sort of tactfully phrased. When somebody just comes out and says, hey, you said this team's going to be good. You're always saying that, and then you get blown out again. What do we make of this? Is that kind of tone based on what Adam said?
Yeah, guys, I wonder if we're sharing sort of the same perspective on these rewriting predictions or whatever. That I don't think the ceiling has necessarily raised on this team. I think the floor has been raised. The floor for Nico is, he threw 2 picks the other night. One of them was a pick 6, and they won by 41. The secondary we've had questions about. I still have some questions about, but it wasn't even really a concern in that game. Here's the thing that I like of what they're doing with the secondary. They know they're really good up front with the defensive line and the pass rush and that depth they have on the defensive line. But there's sort of 2 ways you can approach that. If you have a deficiency on the back end in the secondary and you're really good up front, one way to do it, and they've sort of done this in the past, is try to beat people with your defensive line and just hope your secondary can hold up. Hey guys, you got to cover for 4 seconds, and we'll get to the quarterback. I see them more so far, and maybe this is just because they haven't played SEC teams yet, but they're more leaning into it and not saying secondary you have to hold up while in coverage while the D line gets there. They're bringing pressure from the secondary. They're saying instead of cutting that down from 5 seconds to 4 seconds for the quarterback to get the ball out because you have a good defensive line, they're saying let's cut it down from 4 seconds to 3 seconds by blitzing a safety or a corner or something. Boot Carter blitzed at least 2 or 3 times in the first game. Jacoby Thomas, the safety, did in this one. First ever sack he said he's gotten in his career. Christian Harrison, another one of the nickels, is blitzed. Like, they're sort of leaning into it and saying we're the best at doing this, but we're going to do it even more. And there's a risk to that, but I sort of like the aggression, and I think they're testing that out to see how quick their secondary can get there for what they may use when they get to SEC play. It's an interesting approach, because if you think about you're the opponent and you're thinking, man, if you're the tackle, I've got to get into the backfield quickly to block James Pierce or any of these defensive tackles or Joshua Josephs. Well, now I've got a safety running downhill at me. So now I have one problem that's been compounded by another problem. It's sort of what Tennessee has done on offense for the past few years. It's saying we're going to dictate what happens here. We're going to put the pressure on you, except they're doing it on both sides of the ball now.
John, you were talking about this on our SEC Football Unfiltered podcast, the aggression that you're seeing from the defensive play calling by Tim Banks, and how, like Adam was getting at there, it's sort of a security blanket for the defensive backs, that area of concern that we'd talked about in the preseason. Well, if your defensive front is disruptive, that helps out all layers of your defense. So how does kind of what you're seeing from the aggressive defensive play calling, the way, this unit is kind of disrupting their opponents, how does that affect the way you view the defense as a whole?
Yeah, it has a big effect. I think going into a game, just take a generic opponent and would look at the most plausible way to beat Tennessee. You would say, run some clock, control the ball, run the ball, and take Tennessee, keep Tennessee's offense off the field. I mean, I think that's been a kind of a standard policy since Josh Heupel has been there. Not everybody can execute that, but now it's even harder because of the complementary defense. It's hard running the ball against this defensive front. So to me, if I'm playing Tennessee now, I'm taking a different approach, because if you can't run the ball and then you fall behind and now you're forced to play catch up, you've played right into Tennessee's strategic hands, and Tennessee's going to come after the quarterback. So to me, I think opponents need to be more aggressive against Tennessee's defense from the get-go, because I don't think they're going to just be able to line up and run the ball against that front four.
I thought it was interesting in the post-game press conference, and this is one of the great things about these. Any bowl game or neutral site game, you get the opposing head coach in a press conference, and I think usually those guys are more interesting after a game than the head coach you're used to covering. And Dave Doran made a point of it, and I wrote about it right after the game, is that all through the week he kept telling his team, the guys that we have to be most concerned about are Tennessee's defensive tackles. It wasn't Nico, wasn't Dylan Sampson, wasn't Brew McCoy, it wasn't James Pierce, who ESPN ranked the #1 player in college football. It was the defensive tackles. It's Omari Thomas and Bryson Eason and Omar Norman Lott and that whole group. I think that's pretty telling, is that opponents are looking at them and saying, we can't run the ball, and our quarterback doesn't have time because of the middle of that defensive front, not the edge, the middle of that defensive front is pushing the line of scrimmage back. Tennessee said a lot in the preseason that they would rotate a lot of guys, and Rodney Garner's always rotated a lot on the defensive front, but they've sort of put that plan on steroids thus far. I was going back and looking a little bit of the game yesterday, and it's not just that they're subbing. I counted in the first drive, NC State's first drive, Tennessee subbed 8 different players on the defensive line, 15 different individual substitutions. 15 times a D lineman went in the game and another one came out in the first drive. Not in the game. The first drive, there were 15 substitutions on the defensive line, 8 different players, I think 5 or 6 combinations. They kept switching them up, and then that got deeper and deeper throughout the game. And, when you're rotating that many guys and the ones are a problem and the twos are a problem for opponents, that's where I think you can, think that the ceiling is higher on the season overall, is that it's going to be hard to get tapped out of what you're best at. And that's the defensive front.
Guys, I want to start this next line of conversation with a caveat to say that I don't know how much the AP and US LBM coaches poll really mean in the grand scheme of things. I would argue they mean less than they used to. I mean, sure, they could maybe sway the college football playoff committee's rankings on a subconscious level, perhaps, but mostly they're a subject for debate until we get to the playoff rankings, which do matter because they determine the at-large bids for the playoff. So if these rankings are a subject for debate, well, then let's debate them, because the latest polls have Tennessee number 7 in the AP poll, and they have Tennessee number 9 in the US LBM coaches poll. Now, I think if you were doing these rankings based on the results that have played out on the field, you could make an argument for Tennessee to be ranked higher than 7th. Certainly, you could make an argument for Tennessee to be ranked higher than 9th. But we've all voted in the AP poll at one time or another, and we know that voters can really kind of apply whatever metrics they want to rank teams in however order they see fit. Some voters, will kind of stick to what they had in the preseason, and unless a team loses, they don't do much shuffling. Other voters will fluctuate wildly week to week. I think in the coaches poll, there tends to be a lot less week to week fluctuation. And in fact, when you look at the AP poll, Tennessee jumped 7 spots week over week. They were 14th a week ago after crushing NC State. Now they're number 7. In the coaches poll, Tennessee was 12th, and now they're up to number 9. The coaches just don't like to do much reordering unless a team loses. But the question I have for you guys is 7 or 9, whichever poll you're looking at, is that high enough? Is Tennessee, from your perspective, I know it really doesn't matter, but from your perspective, are they getting enough respect in these polls?
Well, the fluctuations in the coaches, it's usually smaller because the SIDs are the ones voting often, not the coaches. And I think a lot
Leery-eyed
of
SIDs.
yeah, the SID doesn't want to be the one that rocks the boat and moves somebody up 10 spots. Although Dan Mullen, I've been told Dan Mullen was one of the coaches that would always fill out his entire poll every week. Love to do it for whatever reason. I know a couple of others too. Yeah, I mean, when I used to vote, I would early in the season, when I was a voter in the AP poll, I would give a whole lot of credit to teams that beat other ranked teams. I would always do it of what's your signature win and what's your signature loss. And the signature win early in the season is a ranked team. So I don't know where I would have necessarily put Tennessee to start, but I would have bumped them up quite a bit after winning that game. Is number 7 right? I mean, it's number 9. I would have them higher than that. Number 7, I'd probably have them. I mean, I wouldn't have bumped Georgia back or Texas. I'd have maybe had Texas first after beating Michigan. Ohio State's fine. Ole Miss has been really good. Missouri's been really good. I would maybe have Tennessee ahead of Alabama. I mean, they played Western Kentucky the first week. Blowout, that's fine. But the game against South Florida, they were on the ropes for quite a while. And again, Tennessee beat a ranked team. So I would, 6 or 7 is probably where I would have Tennessee. I wouldn't put them any higher than that because I don't think any of those other teams ahead of them have done anything to necessarily drop. But Tennessee's also going to get its chance to defend that top 10 ranking. The Oklahoma game, Oklahoma will still be ranked and ranked high. And if Tennessee wins on the road, they may even move up then, but also they would be confirming what they are, which is a top 10 team. I think also Tennessee fans, I don't think you want to be too high too early. You're in the top 10 now. I think that's as high as you want to be. You certainly don't want to be where you were 2 years ago, where the college football playoff poll comes out and you're number 1. That puts a target on you pretty quick. It's better to be just a little bit on the outside, especially when you've got a 12-team field. Where you're at right now, I think is fine and probably about deserving of where you should be.
John, are the Vols getting snubbed in these polls?
I wouldn't say snubbed. I would say probably should be rated higher. I would have Tennessee in the top 5. I'm kind of at the opposite end of that spectrum when you talk about moving teams up. I think voters in the AP poll, because the AP has addressed this and made it a point of emphasis that don't be afraid to move teams around from week to week. And I always kind of operated like that. Who has the best wins? Who's accomplished the most was something I use as a criterion in judging teams. But right now, I was, while you were talking and Adam was talking, I made a note of teams that have impressed me the most. And I go with Georgia, Texas, Southern California, Ohio State, Tennessee, Miami, and Ole Miss. When I've watched those teams play, they just looked really impressive. Now, then I look at what have they accomplished. well, Ole Miss has overwhelmed two weak opponents. Miami beat what I think is a mediocre at best Florida team, could be even worse than mediocre. So that would probably leave me, and I'm not voting in the poll this year, so I haven't really thought that much about it. But I would have USC, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, and Tennessee in my top 5. And so I don't know the exact order of those teams. I hadn't thought about it that much, but that's just from an overall general impression. And NC State was overrated. Agreed. I don't think it was as bad as Tennessee made it look. And so it does count as a win over a nationally ranked team. So to me, Tennessee's right there with the best teams in the country, and I would have it, and I think 9 is way too low. 7, we can debate that, but 9 is way too low.
Well, you hit on it there, John, but I was going to ask, where do we think that win over NC State, how will that look when we get to like November 1st and we're deeper into the CFP polls? Like, is that looked at as a pretty solid win? It'll be listed the rest of the year as a top 25 win, because that's how that works. It's when you play them. But is NC State going to be an 8-4 top pretty good ACC team, or is this going to be a 6-6 team? Now, of course, they blew out NC State. NC State's terrible. Where do you think we're going to look at this game come November?
Maybe I'm playing devil's advocate here, but is it possible NC State stinks? I mean, in week 1, they had all they could handle for about 3 quarters from Western Carolina. And then they get the brakes beat off them by Tennessee. I mean, that's probably a little bit of an overreaction through 2 weeks of the season. But if we're basing it off of the 8 quarters of football that we've seen, NC State stinks. And that doesn't make me think less of Tennessee, because they still beat, maybe a mediocre at best ACC team by 41 points. So that doesn't make me think of less of Tennessee, but I am rethinking. I wasn't that high on NC State anyway. I would have had them, it was bottom of the top 25, which is where they were. I thought all offseason this was like 80 to 85% chance Tennessee wins this game. I didn't, when I had Tennessee at 9-3, this wasn't one of the games I had Tennessee losing. I felt pretty good about this one. But yeah, if we're basing it on the 8 quarters we've seen, NC State's not very good, but it's like you said, Adam, they were ranked at the time, and I think that perception kind of lingers, even if they finish 6-6, which seems to be in play with this NC State team. They could be a 6-6 team. I still think if Tennessee, takes care of its business, this is still going to be a win that helps them a little bit on the resume, because it's a program that was ranked at the time of the game.
I think Dave Doran's teams have typically been like sort of that 8-4, type season. So I think they'll get better and they'll win some games. I think this will look like maybe like an 8-4 middle of the road ACC team, maybe top 3rd. We'll see. I do think there were some traps that are easy to fall into when gauging NC State, engaging a Tennessee opponent, in that they had a veteran offensive line coming back, like 4 or 5 starters. All those guys were like grad students, been around forever, but they've never been really, really good. They've been okay. So, we fall into this trap every preseason. You have all these starters back, but if they weren't great, then why would they be great? Because they're a year older. And then the other trap was bringing in a very experienced quarterback, Grayson McCall, thrown for like yards and 90 touchdowns, was the Sun Belt Player of the Year. Sometimes that works out. And I think Grayson McCall actually is going to be fine. He's going to win some games for them. But if your offensive line is overrated and your quarterback is maybe overrated or rated about where he needs to be, and you only have one receiver, Concepcion, you don't have 2, then, if you're getting beat up front, it doesn't really matter. And ACC versus SEC, that's normally what you're going to have. And Tennessee was overwhelmingly better on the defensive front. So what NC State possibly will do well was completely annihilated by what Tennessee does well, and some of their strengths were overestimated to begin with.
I think talked about, and I wrote a column about this in preseason about the value of style points. That 51, this won't change. As Adam pointed out, this was a nationally ranked team when you played it. And so there will be that number in parentheses. Its ranking, I think, was 22nd at the end of the year. So when you played it, when you look at your schedule, beat the number 22 team in the country, 51-10 just really sticks out. When you hit that 50-point mark, it signifies total domination. Plus, NC State didn't score 23; it scored 10, and I think those numbers help create an image. Tennessee could have won the game 38-17 and clearly been in control of the game, clearly the superior team. When you look at that 51-10 score and the national ranking at the end of the year, it's going to help Tennessee. What a problem Tennessee could have as far as relying on since NC State to fare well the rest of the year. You certainly, a Tennessee fan, should pull for the Wolfpack. You won't be competing with it for a playoff berth, but so strength of schedule, that would help you. However, the ACC is a little better than I thought it was, maybe quite a bit better from the standpoint the middle of that conference is better than I thought it was. I watched some games Saturday. I've watched Boston College play. I think it's pretty good. I'll be curious to see how it plays against Missouri this week. But those kind of things, all these things factor into it. But you can't get away from those numbers. And I do think NC State, I don't think NC State wins more than 7 games. I don't think it can. I know its schedule's not that tough, but I just see teams on that schedule now that I thought in preseason wouldn't beat it. Now I think they can beat it.
Speaking of style points, John, let's wrap up with this. I guess I should at least mention Tennessee, hey, plays a game this weekend. It's Kent State. Now you're reminded why I waited this long to mention Tennessee's opponent in the podcast, because it's not a matter of if Tennessee is going to win. It's a matter of how much. And we've talked on this pod before about how Josh Heupel, he's not shy about running it up. He's not shy about going for some style points. So what's the number? Realistically, what's the number in this game that Tennessee can hit against Kent State? And is there any such thing as poor sportsmanship when, as John said, in a 12-team playoff, style points could be the difference between a final spot or between your seeding, not just the final spot. How do you determine between an 8 seed, which would get to host a first-round playoff game, or the 9 seed, which has to go on the road and play number 8? Style points might be the difference because those teams could have the same record. So what's the number Tennessee goes out and hangs on Kent State?
Well, the line's like 47.5, 48. I would hit the over pretty heavy there. Tennessee's going to score 60 plus in this game. I hadn't turned my score prediction in yet for the week, but I'm probably going to go like 63-0, 63, maybe 63-3. Tennessee may have like some kind of weird turnover and Kent State kicks a field goal. So, but I think Tennessee's going to hang 60 plus on Kent State. The only thing maybe that would keep that from happening is you've got that rarely used rule where you can have a 10-minute clock in the second half. If I remember though, right, you have to have both coaches agree to it.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I don't see Josh Heupel saying, "Oh yeah, well, we would hate to have an extra chances to score." I see him saying, "Well, Jake Merklinger needs to know how to run the 2-minute offense, just in case." So I think Tennessee's going to score and score and score and score. And gamblers, I would actually stay away from this game because the only one that knows the score is Josh Heupel. Because I think Saturday morning he could pick a number. Like he could ask one of his kids, pick a number, and I think he could probably hit that number with pretty good consistency because he'll get to decide what the score is.
This is where NIL comes into play. You get your big NIL donators and you confer with them and say, Okay, what are you thinking on that point spread, guys? You want to increase your treasure chest for NIL purposes? Okay, we're gonna beat that spread handily, and so go ahead and bet on it. Feel free. Nothing wrong with that. Those guys can bet. They're not players. Um, I just I don't this sportsmanship thing. I don't get that anymore. You've got to do everything you can to get your team ready to win, compete for championships. You can't worry about the other guy. If you want to do that, you just have to have a mercy rule. And that's not fair to the guys that are on the bench who need to play and need the repetition. So I don't even think about that. If Josh Heupel wants to hit 80, so be it. You've got to manage, though, in terms of your star players, not just your stars, but your starters. You don't want to get people hurt. You want to save them from too much wear and tear. So I don't expect to see Nico in the second half of this game. Maybe there comes a time when we won't see Nico in the second quarter. The game will be so well in hand.
Well, it's John. It's funny you mentioned NIL because I think in a different way NIL comes into play here because you've got a lot of players that are being paid NIL money that are in the freshman class, redshirt freshman, bottom of the roster. That this is the type of game where you're going to go give them some numbers that make them happy. Mike Matthews, their 5-star wide receiver, was out with an injury with a hamstring in the first game when it was a blowout. He's healthy now. You better believe Mike Matthews is going to get some catches and probably get a touchdown. Chris Brazel's a starter and he's played well, but he hasn't gotten his first touchdown yet. The Tulane transfer, they'll try to get him one. They're going to spread the wealth around all those, highly rated defensive linemen that are getting on the field some. They're going to get on the field a whole lot more because James Pierce is going to be out of there by the end of the first quarter. Peyton Lewis, Cam Seldon, those running backs, they'll get plenty of runs. So, when you look at Josh Heupel's depth chart that he puts out, and there's like 4 different starters, there's ors all across the depth chart. They do that to make sure everybody's happy. In games like this, they'll get to pile up a lot of stats to make everybody happy, and this is the perfect game to do it in.
I've got a question for you, Blake. What if Nico was not going? If we knew ahead of time Nico would not play in this game, what would be the point spread? What do you guys think the point spread would be?
I might modify at that point to like a 45-3 Tennessee win instead of I kind of like Adam's number about 63-3. I think I covered a Josh Heupel game once when he was the offensive coordinator at Missouri. I believe the Tigers hung 77. Maybe one day that I was covering Heupel while he was in OC. So 63 may not be a high enough with Nico. Without Nico, yeah, I'd go 45-3.
What do you think, Adam? What would you put the point line at?
Well, I mean, they would run the ball more without Nico, which they would maybe score even more if they just ran the ball. You would just go hurry up offense and just hand the ball off over and over and over. You'd probably get more chunk plays going that way. Now, I mean, 63-3 probably with Nico. Without him, 59-3.
Geez, so Nico's only 4 points better than their backup.
Yeah, well, Josh Heupel would take it as a challenge because Josh Heupel is always thinking of how can I rationalize running this score up in a way that sounds human. And I think he would say something like, well, we had a backup quarterback in there. And so we're just trying to, get the kinks out of the offense without Nico in there. And so we had to run our offense, and running the offense would be scoring as many as they would with Nico.
All right. Well, we're showing no mercy here on the Volunteer State podcast. You can find all the coverage of that Kent State game over at KnoxNews.com. Adam will have the coverage. John will have the commentary. And perhaps more important than the coverage of the game, they will keep their eye on the playoff race where Tennessee factors in right now after 2 weeks. Yes, it's still early, but nothing but good news for Tennessee as it pertains to the 12-team college football playoff. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Volunteer State.